This is the story of an ordinary object with an extraordinary fate. The story of a mask, a cast taken of an unknown woman's face, which became the subject of obsessive preoccupation throughout Europe during the early 1900s. She would be dubbed the Mona Lisa of suicide and inspire countless works from the most influential authors and artists of the era. So massive was the splash made by this mask that its influence still permeates our cultures today. She's called l'inconnue de la Seine, or the unknown woman of the Seine, and this is her remarkable story. In the late 1880s, a young woman was found dead in the River Seine in Paris. This river was, and still is, a popular destination for those seeking to end their lives. And since her body did not show any signs of physical trauma, the resident pathologist reasonably designated her death a suicide by drowning. As was per custom, her body was washed and put on public display in the Paris morgue, alongside other unclaimed bodies, in the hopes of being identified. This may strike us as a strange practice, but at the time, the Paris morgue held a morbid fascination over the locals and attracted an astonishing number of daily visitors. But unfortunately, nobody recognized her. The story would end here for most who are unfortunate enough to end up in the Paris morgue. But in this particular instance, an employee of the morgue was so captivated by her beauty that he felt compelled to commission a plaster cast of her face before decomposition irrevocably destroyed its features. And looking at the resulting mask, one can certainly understand the allure. A young, full, and delicate face that looks less dead than peacefully sleeping. Her cheeks are plump and defined, her large eyes forever closed, her eyelashes appearing to be still wet from the river. But without a doubt, the crown jewel is her enigmatic half-smile, subtle and serene, almost hinting that her death was a painless and peaceful one. The molder who was commissioned to make the mask kept the mold and began selling copies in his shop, telling her story to potential buyers. It sold extremely well. Soon, her likeness was reproduced on a massive scale and in many forms: photographs, postcards, drawings, miniature and life-size casts, and even effigies. And before long, it became a cult object adorning countless walls all over Europe and reaching as far as the United States. In his book, The Savage God, critic Alvarez reports that an entire generation of young women modeled their look after the mask. He further elaborates that all over the continent, the unknown woman became the erotic ideal of the period, much like Brigitte Bardot or Marilyn Monroe were for the 1950s. Her story captivated the public's imagination to the extent that some scholars attribute to her influence an epidemic of suicides that ravaged the youth of several French cities in the early 1900s. She became, by all means, and I hesitate to use this phrase, a cultural icon. This is evident, in my opinion, in an article published in 1951 in the newspaper La Presse, in which the anonymous author equates l'inconnue's cultural significance to that of the Eiffel Tower or l'Arc de Triomphe, saying, "Foreign tourists do not leave the capital without having stuffed their suitcases with an 8-inch Eiffel Tower, a paperweight representing the Arc de Triomphe, or a molding, always the same one, of the unknown woman of the Seine." Her widespread fame ignited a scholarly interest in death masks, directly inciting the publication of a highly influential German book called Das ewige Antlitz, which compiled a collection of death masks belonging to the most influential figures in human history. The likes of Napoleon, Wagner, Isaac Newton, Beethoven, Nietzsche, Lenin, and George Washington were all featured alongside the unknown woman, further demonstrating the extent of her perceived cultural significance and the high esteem in which she was held. This book would result in a strange connection. The style of photography used in the book was based on a popular photo of the unknown woman's mask, in which the subject is flooded with light in front of a black background, giving the impression of a floating head. This style, which the book popularized, served as an inspiration for a highly effective election poster produced by the Nazi Party in the 1932 German presidential elections, helping Hitler secure the win, meaning that by a convoluted turn of events, the unknown woman influenced Hitler's rise to power. Now, by no means am I suggesting that she even remotely helped him win the election, but there is no doubt that without her influence, this powerful piece of propaganda wouldn't have existed. Another peculiar connection was established when a Norwegian toy maker, who was working with two physicians to create the world's first CPR mannequin, encountered the unknown woman's face. Enamored by her beauty, he used her as a model for the mannequin's head, which was a remarkable success and is still in production today, giving the unknown woman the title of the most kissed face in history. They named their creation Resuscitation Annie, and it was used as an instrument for CPR training around the world. Students were, and still are, taught to continuously communicate with the simulated victim as they performed CPR, repeating the sentence, "Annie, are you okay?" This will ring a bell for most of you, as the same phrase was referenced in the Michael Jackson classic Smooth Criminal. So by a strange twist of fate, when Michael Jackson says, "Annie, are you okay? Are you okay, Annie?" he is speaking to the unknown woman of the Seine, though I doubt that he or whoever wrote the lyrics ever knew. Needless to say, L'Inconnue became the muse of countless artists, poets, and writers, such as Picasso, Man Ray, Rilke, and Nabokov. It was in fact Albert Camus, the famous French philosopher, who called her the Mona Lisa of suicide. Among the countless works she was featured in is the novella Die Unbekannte by Konrad Muschla, first published in 1934 and still in print today, selling millions of copies. She was also a crucial figure and motif in the masterpiece Aurelian by Louis Aragon, which was ranked 51st in Le Monde's 100 Books of the Century. Her influence can also be found in modern media, such as the poster of the highly successful film Amélie. On a side note, it's a wonderful movie. Watch it if you have the time. Now that we've wrapped our heads around just how famous and influential the mask was, the question that begs itself: why were Europeans so obsessed with this rather ordinary object? Well, the 19th century was a period of morbid aesthetics. European culture was a culture obsessed with death and the general theme of mortality. This is made abundantly clear by the fact that these themes overwhelmingly dominate the art and literature of the period. But to fully appreciate the magnitude of this strange fascination, we must look no further than the gruesome spectacle that was the Paris Morgue. The Paris Morgue was a public establishment that could best be described as a museum of the recently dead. Its official purpose was to employ the public's assistance in identifying unknown bodies, and it functioned by publicly displaying unclaimed corpses found around the city behind a glass window, bearing a disturbing resemblance to a department store. Indeed, the playwright Léon Gozlan remarked that you go there to see the drowned as elsewhere you go to see the latest fashion. This morbid theater attracted more visitors than the Notre Dame, and the more gruesome the death, the longer the queues, sometimes reaching up to 40,000 visitors in a single day. It was featured in every tourist guide of the city as a must-see attraction, and the guaranteed crowd attracted street vendors and even performers, resulting in an almost festive atmosphere. Locals, tourists, families on a day out, and workers on their lunch break leered at fresh cadavers with unabashed curiosity. But Europeans weren't just fascinated with death, they actually had a strong preference for female death. The death of a beautiful woman is, unquestionably, the most poetical topic in the world. This infamous phrase, attributed to Edgar Allan Poe, captures perfectly the aesthetic taste of the time. Critic Bronfen notes that representations of female death were so prevalent in European culture that by the middle of the 19th century, this theme was already hovering on the periphery of cliché. It is no exaggeration to say that every household with aspirations of cultural elitism considered it imperative to own and display a portrait of a dying girl. Among the many representations of dead or dying women emanating from this period, Shakespeare's Ophelia was the single most often represented one. Ophelia is of course the character in Hamlet who commits suicide by drowning. Her morbid beauty set the standard for the 19th century feminine ideal. Her representations were so ubiquitous that the drowned female became a romantic stereotype that was so familiar to people that the sight of a woman merely standing near a body of water would immediately suggest a woman about to kill herself. One of the very first and most successful paintings of Ophelia was created by the artist Millet, depicting her lying dead in a pool of water. His model for the portrait, Elizabeth Siral, was one of the most sought-after models of the time, revered for her death-like pale skin and aloof gaze, which became a staple of the period's erotic imagination. Wanting to be as desirable as Ophelia, women of all walks of life began replicating this sickly look, powdering their faces pale and starving themselves near to death, starting the very first wave of anorexic starvation. In fact, the Parisian cosmetics company Hobigan created massive interest for its latest facial powder by calling it Powder Ophelia and advertising it as a true talisman of beauty, capable of achieving the appearance of being as decorously pale and fragile as any true Ophelia. And at the height of this peculiar craze emerged the story of L'Inconnue, with obvious parallels to Ophelia, only she was superior in two aspects. First, she wasn't a fictional Shakespearean character. She was a real person whose actual death mask you could own. And secondly, unlike Ophelia, nothing was known about her life. So like a Rorschach blot, her face functioned as the receptacle for whatever feelings the onlooker wished to project onto it. It is easy to see how a culture obsessed with Ophelia would latch onto the unknown woman in a similar way. Magda Romanska put it very elegantly, saying that in the popular and literary imagination of the time, L'Inconnue was the embodied aftertaste of the cult of Ophelia. L'Inconnue's story and its timing were simply perfect for this strange society. Too perfect. It almost appears to be tailor-made. You could even say designed. Well, it was a hoax. A complete and utter hoax. Let's start with the obvious. This does not look like a cast taken of a drowning victim. The skin of drowning victims exhibit distortions and wrinkles similar to the ones you experience when you take a bath, only a lot more pronounced. In addition, bloating occurs after drowning, ranging from mild to severe depending on how long the body has been in the water. Also, in a river as busy with traffic as the Seine in the late 19th century, it is inconceivable to imagine that a suicide victim would emerge from the foul water without a blemish. As for the most revered aspect of L'Inconnue, her smile, the flaccidity of the facial muscles which occur soon after death would have made it impossible. She simply looks too healthy. Her expression is too defined and deliberate to be taken from a dead subject. This is confirmed by countless modern pathologists and morticians consulted on the matter. As you would expect, numerous people intrigued by the mask and its legend have scrutinized the registers and archives of Paris for any trace of L'Inconnue's existence, but nothing could be found. Some researchers, such as David Phillips and Hélène Pinier, have even corresponded with the prefecture of Paris in the 1900s, asking about any existing records of the unknown woman, only to be told that none existed, in spite of the fact that death records have been kept by the prefecture since the late 1700s. But the most damning piece of evidence that the story is a hoax is this photo. While researching this story, I came across this photo in a rare first edition print of a book called Cours de dessin in the collection of the Museum of the University of Helsinki. The book is a drawing manual, authored by the artist Charles Barge, and the page containing L'Inconnue is found in a chapter concerned with drawing sculptures. The book was published in 1867, meaning that the mask had already existed for at least 20 years before L'Inconnue's alleged suicide, conclusively disproving that the mask was the result of a cast taken of her face post-mortem in the 1880s. The current proprietor of Lorenzi's workshop, one of the first, if not the first place in Paris to start selling the mask, agrees with this assessment. He says, This does not look to me like a face of a dead person. It's very hard to maintain a smile while a cast is being taken, so I think she was a professional, a very good model. The question of how the legend started and spread can't really be answered. This is pure speculation, but you can easily imagine a shopkeeper selling this mask, make up the story and telling it to potential buyers to boost his sales. I opened this video by saying that it's a story of an ordinary object with an extraordinary fate. And that's exactly what the mask is, an ordinary object. This is evident by the way the mask is named in the book Cours de Dessin. Every sculpture featured in the book is given a proper name, such as Psyche of Naples, Annie of Brittany, and Julia Mamea, with the exception of only 4 sculptures. This one is called Head of Infant, and this one is called Young Girl. This one is called Young Boy, and finally L'Inconnu is casually titled Young Woman, no different than the other 3 sculptures. Somehow, 20 years later, it became the most recognized face in Europe. Life is very, very strange. If you'd like to watch more of these documentaries, please consider subscribing to the channel, liking the video, and share it. It'll be a huge help. And consider supporting the channel on Patreon. My laptop almost burnt a hole through my desk while rendering this video. With your support, I could get a better machine. If there is a specific topic you'd like me to cover, please make sure you tell me in the comments. I'll see you soon.